The sun was setting over downtown as Officer Martinez adjusted his rearview mirror and checked the time on his dashboard. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday evening and traffic was moving steadily through the main street. His partner, Officer Johnson, was filling out paperwork from their last call when the black motorcycle caught Martinez's attention. The bike was moving fast, weaving between cars with practiced ease, but it was definitely over the speed limit. Martinez flipped on his lights and hit the siren twice. The motorcycle rider saw the signal immediately and pulled over to the side of the road without any drama. Most speeders would try to argue or make excuses, but this rider just turned off his engine and waited. Martinez parked the patrol car behind the motorcycle and both officers got out. The rider was already removing his helmet when they approached. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and calm eyes. He wore a simple black leather jacket over jeans and boots. Nothing fancy or expensive looking, just regular clothes. But something about his posture and the way he sat on the bike made Martinez take notice. The man held himself like someone used to being in charge. "Good evening, officer," the rider said. As Martinez walked up, his voice was steady and respectful. "I know I was going too fast." Martinez was surprised. Most people tried to deny speeding or claimed they didn't realize how fast they were going. This man admitted it right away without being asked. Johnson moved to the other side of the motorcycle, following standard procedure for traffic stops. "License and registration, please," Martinez said, pulling out his citation book. The rider reached into his jacket pocket slowly, keeping his movements visible. He handed over his driver's license and the bike's registration papers without saying anything else. Martinez looked at the license. The name read James Richardson, age 54, with an address about 30 miles outside the city. The photo matched the man sitting on the bike. Everything looked normal at first glance, but when Martinez checked the registration, he noticed something odd. The paperwork had some kind of code he hadn't seen before. "Mr. Richardson, this is your motorcycle?" Martinez asked. "Yes, sir, it is," Richardson replied. He sat perfectly still on the bike with his hands resting on his knees. Most people would be fidgeting or looking around nervously, but Richardson just waited patiently. Johnson walked back to the patrol car to run the license and registration through the system. This was routine for every traffic stop. The computer would check for outstanding warrants, stolen vehicles, or other red flags. Martinez stayed with Richardson, who hadn't moved from his position on the bike. "You live pretty far from here," Martinez said, making conversation while they waited for the computer check. "What brings you downtown?" Richardson looked at Martinez for a moment before answering. "Family business," he said simply. "Had to take care of something important." There was something in his tone that made Martinez pay closer attention. Richardson wasn't being rude or secretive, but he wasn't volunteering any extra information either. Most people would explain where they were going or what they were doing, especially when they'd been caught speeding. Richardson just answered the question and stopped talking. Johnson came back from the patrol car with a puzzled expression on his face. He motioned for Martinez to step away from the motorcycle. They walked a few feet away where Richardson couldn't hear their conversation. "The computer system is acting weird," Johnson whispered. "The license came back clean, no warrants or anything. But when I ran the bike registration, it triggered some kind of flag I've never seen before." Martinez frowned. "What kind of flag?" "It's showing as a military designation," Johnson said. "The system wants me to contact dispatch for additional instructions." The whole screen lit up with warnings. They both looked back at Richardson, who was still sitting calmly on his bike. He hadn't tried to listen to their conversation or look around to see what was taking so long. He just waited like someone who was used to following procedures. Martinez walked back to Richardson while Johnson went to radio dispatch. "Mr. Richardson, we're just checking a few things with your registration." "It'll be a few more minutes," Richardson nodded. "Take your time, officer. I'm not in a hurry." This was getting stranger by the minute. Every other speeder Martinez had ever stopped was eager to get going, especially when the stop was taking longer than usual. They would ask questions, complain about being late, or try to hurry the process along. Richardson acted like he had all the time in the world, Johnson finished talking to dispatch and came back with an even more confused look. Dispatch says they need to make some calls, he told Martinez quietly. They want us to keep him here until they figure out what's going on with that registration flag. Martinez nodded and walked back to Richardson. Sir, we're going to need you to wait here for a few more minutes while we sort out some paperwork. Issues. For the first time since the stop began, Richardson showed a reaction. He looked at his watch and then back at Martinez. Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I really need to make a phone call. It's important. You can make a call once we finish here, Martinez said. It shouldn't be much longer. Richardson's jaw tightened slightly. Officer, with all due respect, I need to make that call now. People are expecting me to check in. Something about the way he said check in made Martinez more suspicious. That sounded like something a criminal might say about reporting to a boss or handler. Combined with the strange computer flag and Richardson's unusual calm behavior, Martinez started to wonder if they had stumbled onto something bigger than a simple speeding ticket. Sir, you're going to have to wait, Martinez said firmly. We'll get this sorted out as quickly as possible. Richardson stared at Martinez for a long moment. Then he slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Both officers tensed, but Richardson only pulled out his cell phone. Officer, I'm going to ask you one more time to let me make this call, Richardson said. Trust me when I say it's in everyone's best interest. The way he said it wasn't threatening, but it wasn't a request either. It sounded like someone who was used to giving orders and having them followed. Martinez's suspicion grew stronger. In his experience, only criminals and people with something to hide talked like that during traffic stops. Martinez shook his head and stepped back from Richardson. The man's insistence on making a phone call was raising red flags. In Martinez's 10 years as a police officer, he had learned that people who demanded special treatment during traffic stops usually had something to hide. Drug dealers often needed to check in with their suppliers. Gang members had to report their location to their leaders. Richardson's calm attitude and expensive motorcycle were starting to fit a pattern Martinez had seen before. Sir, put the phone away, Martinez said firmly. You'll have plenty of time to make calls after we finish here. Richardson looked at the phone in his hand, then back at Martinez. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, but then he slowly put the phone back in his jacket pocket. His movements were controlled and deliberate, like someone who was used to following orders. Even when he disagreed with them. Johnson came back from the patrol car again, this time looking more worried than confused. He motioned Martinez away from Richardson once more. They walked to the front of the police car where they could talk privately. Dispatch is really confused about this guy, Johnson whispered. They've never seen a flag like this before. The computer keeps asking for security clearance codes that our department doesn't have. Martinez glanced back at Richardson, who was now checking his watch again. The man seemed to be getting more anxious as time passed, which only made Martinez more suspicious. What kind of security clearance? They don't know, Johnson said. The system just keeps asking for military authorization codes. Dispatch called the county sheriff's office, but they don't know what it means either. They're trying to contact someone at the state level. This was getting complicated fast. Martinez had handled thousands of traffic stops, but he had never encountered anything like this. The computer systems were designed to be simple. You ran a license and registration, got back basic information, and wrote the ticket. Military codes and security clearances were not part of normal traffic enforcement. How long is this going to take? Martinez asked. Dispatch says maybe another 30 minutes, Johnson replied. They need time to figure out who to call. Martinez looked at Richardson again. The man was still sitting calmly on his motorcycle, but he was checking his watch more frequently now. Every few minutes, Richardson would look down at his wrist, then glance toward the officers, then back at his watch. It was clear he was supposed to be somewhere else. 30 minutes is a long time to hold someone for a speeding ticket, Martinez said. I know, but dispatch says we have to wait, Johnson replied. Whatever that flag means, it's serious enough that they don't want us to let him go without getting answers. Martinez walked back to Richardson, trying to appear casual and professional. He didn't want the man to know how confused they were about the situation. "Mr. Richardson, we're still working on those paperwork issues. It's going to be a little while longer." Richardson's calm facade cracked slightly. "Officer, I told you I need to make a phone call. People are waiting for me to report in, and when I don't, they're going to start looking for me." The way he said, "report in" and "looking for me" made Martinez even more suspicious. Those were exactly the kinds of phrases he had heard from criminals who were part of larger organizations. Drug dealers had to report their movements to avoid suspicion from their bosses. Gang members had check-in schedules to prove they weren't talking to police. "Who exactly is waiting for you to report in?" Martinez asked, pulling out his notepad. "And where were you supposed to be going?" Richardson stared at Martinez for a long moment. "Officer, I can't give you those details right now. That's why I need to make the phone call." This answer made Martinez more convinced that Richardson was involved in something illegal. Innocent people didn't refuse to say where they were going or who they were meeting. They especially didn't talk about needing permission to give basic information to police officers. "Mr. Richardson, I'm going to need you to step off the motorcycle," Martinez said. "We're going to need to search the bike." Richardson's eyes widened slightly. "Officer, you pulled me over for speeding. You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle." The fact that Richardson knew about probable cause was another red flag. Most regular citizens didn't understand the legal requirements for police searches. Only people who had dealt with law enforcement before would know those terms. Martinez was becoming more certain that Richardson was not the ordinary citizen he appeared to be. "Sir, your unusual behavior and refusal to answer basic questions is giving me reasonable suspicion," Martinez said. "Please step away from the motorcycle." Richardson sat still for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Martinez could see him thinking, calculating what to do next. Finally, Richardson slowly got off the bike and took a few steps back. He kept his hands visible and moved carefully, but Martinez could tell he was not happy about the situation. Johnson began searching the motorcycle while Martinez kept an eye on Richardson. The bike was clean and well maintained, but there was nothing obviously suspicious about it. No hidden compartments, no unusual modifications, nothing that would indicate illegal activity. "The bike's clean," Johnson reported after a few minutes. Martinez was disappointed but not surprised. Professional criminals were usually careful about keeping evidence away from their vehicles. The fact that the bike was clean didn't mean Richardson was innocent. It might just mean he was smart. Richardson checked his watch again, and his anxiety was becoming more visible. "Officers, I really need to make that phone call now. Every minute that passes is making this situation worse." "Worse how?" Martinez asked immediately. "Are you threatening us?" "No, I'm not threatening anyone," Richardson said quickly. "I'm trying to prevent a misunderstanding that's going to get out of hand very quickly." Martinez didn't like the sound of that. Talk about situations getting out of hand sounded like criminal organizations might be planning to interfere with police business. He had heard stories about drug dealers whose associates would show up at traffic stops to intimidate officers or help their friends escape. What kind of misunderstanding? Martinez pressed. Richardson looked at his watch again and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked directly at Martinez. "Officer, I'm asking you one last time to let me make this phone call. If I don't check in with my people in the next few minutes, they're going to assume something has happened to me and they're going to come looking." The threat was becoming clearer now. Richardson's associates were planning to come to the scene if he didn't report in on schedule. Martinez had heard about situations like this before, where traffic stops turned dangerous when criminal organizations sent backup to help their members. He needed to call for additional units before Richardson's friends arrived. Martinez felt his heart rate increase as he processed Richardson's words about people coming to look for him. This was exactly the kind of situation that could turn a simple traffic stop into something dangerous. He had heard stories from other officers about drug dealers whose backup arrived at traffic stops, sometimes armed and always aggressive. The smart thing to do was call for additional units before Richardson's associates showed up. Johnson, get on the radio and request backup, Martinez said quietly, trying not to let Richardson hear him, but Richardson was watching Martinez carefully and seemed to understand what was happening. Officer, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be, Richardson said, his voice still calm but with an edge of urgency. Just let me make one phone call and I can explain everything. Martinez was torn between following procedure and his growing concern about the situation. Department policy was clear about not letting suspects make phone calls during stops, especially when they might be calling associates who could interfere. But Richardson's calm insistence was starting to make Martinez wonder if he was missing something important. Johnson came back from the patrol car shaking his head. Dispatch says backup is 20 minutes away. All the other units are tied up with a multi-car accident on the highway. 20 minutes felt like a very long time when Richardson's mysterious associates might be on their way. Martinez looked at Richardson, who was checking his watch again with increasing frequency. The man was clearly getting more anxious as time passed, but he wasn't showing any signs of trying to escape or become violent. Mr. Richardson, I'm going to ask you directly, Martinez said. Are you involved in any illegal activities? Do you have associates who might come here looking for you? Richardson looked at Martinez with what seemed like genuine confusion. Officer, I'm not involved in anything illegal. But yes, my people will come looking for me if I don't check in soon, and when they do, it's going to create a situation that nobody wants. The way Richardson said my people made Martinez more nervous. That was exactly the kind of language gang leaders and drug dealers used when talking about their organizations. But there was something about Richardson's tone that didn't quite fit the pattern. He didn't sound threatening or arrogant like most criminals did when they talked about backup coming. He sounded worried, like he was genuinely concerned about what might happen. What kind of situation are you talking about? Martinez asked. Richardson ran his hand through his hair, looking more frustrated than Martinez had seen him since the stop began. Officer, my unit is conducting a training exercise about 12 miles from here. I'm supposed to check in every hour during personal leave. If I miss my check-in time and they can't reach me, they're going to assume I'm in trouble and respond accordingly. Martinez blinked in surprise. Your unit? What kind of unit? I'm active duty military, Richardson said simply. I was on my way back to base when you pulled me over. This was not what Martinez had been expecting at all. He looked at Johnson, who seemed equally surprised. Military personnel didn't usually act like criminals during traffic stops, but Richardson's behavior had seemed so suspicious. The calm attitude, the refusal to explain where he was going, the talk about reporting in and people looking for him, it all made sense now if he was telling the truth. Why didn't you tell us that from the beginning? Martinez asked. Because I'm not in uniform and this isn't official business, Richardson replied. I had a family emergency and got permission for a few hours of personal leave. I didn't think it was relevant to a speeding ticket. Martinez felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. If Richardson was telling the truth, then they had been treating a military officer like a criminal suspect for the past 30 minutes. But the computer flag still didn't make sense, and Martinez wasn't ready to take Richardson's word for everything. Can you prove you're military? Martinez asked. Richardson reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a military identification card. He handed it to Martinez, who examined it carefully. The card looked official and had Richardson's photo on it, along with his rank and unit information. According to the ID, James Richardson was a colonel in the United States Army. Martinez stared at the card in shock. He had been treating a colonel like a drug dealer for half an hour. Johnson looked over his shoulder at the ID and whistled softly under his breath. Colonel Richardson, I apologize for the confusion, Martinez said, handing back the ID. But you have to understand how your behavior seemed suspicious. Richardson took back his ID and checked his watch again. Officer, I understand you were doing your job, but I really need to make that phone call now. I'm already 15 minutes late for my check-in. Martinez nodded quickly. Of course, go ahead. Richardson pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. The call was answered almost immediately. This is Colonel Richardson. he said into the phone. "I know I'm late for check-in. I got pulled over for speeding and the situation got complicated." Martinez could hear someone talking on the other end of the call, but couldn't make out the words. Richardson's expression grew more serious as he listened. "No, I'm fine," Richardson said firmly. "It was just a misunderstanding with local police. I'm about 12 miles south of base on Highway 9. There was more talking from the other end of the call," and Richardson's face went pale. "What do you mean you already dispatched a response team?" Richardson asked, his voice rising slightly. Martinez felt his stomach drop. A military response team sounded like it could be a serious problem. He moved closer to Richardson, trying to hear more of the conversation. "How long ago did they leave?" Richardson asked into the phone. The answer made Richardson close his eyes and shake his head slowly. "They left 10 minutes ago?" Richardson said. "With full tactical gear?" Martinez and Johnson looked at each other with growing alarm. A military tactical team was heading their way, and they had no idea what that meant for their safety or the situation. "Listen to me very carefully," Richardson said into the phone, his voice now urgent. "Call them back and tell them to stand down. This is not a hostile situation. I repeat, this is not hostile." But as Richardson listened to the response, his face showed that it was too late. Whatever was coming was already on the way, and there was no stopping it now. Richardson ended the phone call and looked at Martinez with an expression that was part apology and part concern. "Officer, we have a problem," he said quietly. "My unit thinks I'm in danger, and they're coming to get me." Martinez felt his mouth go dry. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means 50 soldiers in full combat gear are heading this way in armored vehicles," Richardson said, checking his watch again. "They should be here in about 5 minutes. Johnson had been listening to the conversation and his face went white. "50 soldiers? Coming here?" Richardson nodded grimly. "When a commanding officer misses check-in and can't be reached, standard protocol is to assume hostile action and respond with overwhelming force. I tried to call them off, but they're already in transit and following radio silence procedures." Martinez looked around at the quiet street where they had made the traffic stop. A few cars had driven by during their conversation, but it was mostly residential area with houses and small businesses. The thought of military vehicles and armed soldiers descending on this peaceful neighborhood was terrifying. "Can't you call them again and tell them to turn around?" Martinez asked desperately. "They won't answer the radio now," Richardson explained. "Once a rescue operation is authorized, the team maintains communication silence until they reach the target area. It's designed to prevent the enemy from intercepting their plans." The irony of the situation was not lost on Martinez. The very protocols designed to protect Colonel Richardson were now creating a dangerous confrontation between military and civilian authorities. Martinez had no training for dealing with military operations, and he had no idea what 50 armed soldiers would do when they arrived at what looked like a police arrest. "What do we do when they get here?" Johnson asked, his voice shaky. Richardson thought for a moment. "The team will be led by my second-in-command, Captain Sarah Chun. She's experienced and professional, but she's also trained to neutralize threats to her commanding officer. When she sees me with police officers, she's going to assume you're the threat." This was getting worse by the minute. Martinez realized that from the military's perspective, 2 police officers holding their colonel during a missed check-in would look exactly like a hostage situation. They would have no way of knowing it was just a traffic stop that got complicated. "Can you explain to them what really happened?" Martinez asked. "I'll try," Richardson said, "but Captain Chun's first priority will be securing my safety. She want to get me away from you before asking questions." In the distance, Martinez could hear a low rumbling sound that was getting louder. It sounded like heavy trucks or construction equipment, but he knew it had to be the military vehicles Richardson had warned them about. The sound was getting closer quickly. "They're coming fast," Richardson observed, listening to the approaching noise. Martinez grabbed his radio and tried to contact dispatch. "This is Unit 12. We need immediate supervisor response to our location. We have a situation developing with military personnel." The radio crackled back immediately. Unit 12, what kind of situation? Do you need additional backup? Negative on backup, Martinez said quickly, realizing that more police officers would only make things worse. We need a supervisor who can coordinate with military authorities. We have about 3 minutes before they arrive. Johnson was staring down the street where the rumbling sound was coming from. I can see them, he said in a tight voice. Martinez looked in the same direction and felt his heart skip a beat. 3 large armored vehicles were coming down the street at high speed. They looked like something from a war movie, not something that belonged in a residential neighborhood. The vehicles were painted in military camouflage and had large tires that made them tower over regular cars. Stay calm, Richardson said to both officers. Don't make any sudden movements when they arrive. Keep your hands visible and don't reach. For your weapons? The first armored vehicle pulled up about 50 feet away and stopped. The second and third vehicles positioned themselves to block the street in both directions. Martinez realized they were being surrounded according to military tactics he had only seen in movies. Soldiers began pouring out of the vehicles with practiced efficiency. They were all wearing full combat gear with helmets, body armor, and automatic weapons. Within seconds, Martinez found himself looking at more firepower than he had ever seen in his 10 years as a police officer. The soldiers spread out in a defensive formation around the traffic stop area. Some took positions behind their vehicles while others moved to secure the perimeter. They moved with precision and speed that showed extensive training. Martinez and Johnson stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might be seen as threatening. A woman in military uniform approached from the lead vehicle. She was shorter than most of the soldiers but carried herself with obvious authority. Martinez could see captain's bars on her uniform and assumed this was Captain Chun that Richardson had mentioned. Colonel Richardson, Captain Chun called out, as she walked toward them. Are you injured? Are you being held against your will? Richardson stepped forward slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Captain Chun, I'm fine. This is a misunderstanding. These officers pulled me over for speeding and the situation got complicated. Captain Chun's eyes moved between Richardson and the 2 police officers, clearly assessing the threat level. Martinez could see her trying to determine if Richardson was speaking freely or under duress. Her hand rested on her sidearm, ready to draw if necessary. Colonel, please step away from the civilian authorities, Captain Chun ordered. We'll sort this out once you're secure. Martinez watched as Richardson moved toward Captain Chun and the other soldiers. The military personnel were treating this like a rescue operation, and the police officers were being viewed as potential enemies. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming, but Martinez knew that one wrong move could turn this into a deadly confrontation. More soldiers had taken positions around the area, and Martinez could see curious neighbors starting to come out of their houses to see what was happening. The sight of military vehicles and armed soldiers in their quiet neighborhood was drawing attention from everyone within several blocks. Captain, Richardson said once he was closer to the military personnel, I need you to understand that these officers were just doing their job. There was no threat to me. But Captain Chun was still focused on securing the area and protecting her commanding officer. The training and protocols that had brought her here were not easily set aside even, with Richardson's assurance that he was safe. Captain Chun surveyed the scene with the trained eye of someone who had handled many dangerous situations. 50 soldiers had taken defensive positions around the area, their weapons ready but not aimed directly at anyone. The 2 police officers stood frozen by their patrol car, clearly overwhelmed by the military response they had accidentally triggered. Neighbors were gathering on their porches and sidewalks, some taking pictures with their phones of the armored vehicles that had suddenly appeared in their quiet neighborhood. Colonel Richardson, Captain Chun said formally, I need a complete briefing on what happened here before I can stand down my unit. Richardson understood the position his second-in-command was in. She had followed proper military protocol by responding with overwhelming force to protect her commanding officer. Now she needed to be absolutely certain there was no threat before she could order her soldiers to relax their defensive posture. Captain, at 18:45 hours, I was pulled over by Officer Martinez for exceeding the speed limit on Highway 9. Richardson began, using military time and formal language that his soldiers would understand. The traffic stop proceeded normally until the officers ran my vehicle registration through their computer system. Martinez listened as Richardson explained the situation in precise military terms. It was strange hearing the simple traffic stop described like a military operation. But Martinez was beginning to understand how differently the military and civilian police viewed the same events. The civilian computer system flagged my registration with a military designation that triggered security protocols, Richardson continued. The local officers, not understanding the nature of the flag, detained me for additional questioning while they contacted their supervisors. Captain Chun nodded, taking in the information while keeping one eye on the police officers. "How long were you detained, Colonel?" "Approximately 45 minutes, Richardson replied. During that time, I repeatedly requested permission to make contact with base operations to report my status, but the officers denied my requests because they suspected I might be involved in criminal activity. Martinez felt his face flush with embarrassment as he listened to Richardson's account. When described in military terms, their handling of the situation sounded even more foolish than it had felt at the time. They had treated a decorated army colonel like a common criminal because they didn't understand the computer flag. The officers acted according to their training and protocols, Richardson added quickly. They had no way of knowing my military status until I was finally permitted to present my identification. Captain Chen looked at Martinez and Johnson for the first time since arriving. "Officers, is this account accurate?" Martinez found his voice, though it came out somewhat shaky. "Yes, ma'am, that's correct. We apologize for the misunderstanding. When the computer system flagged Colonel Richardson's registration, we didn't know what it meant. And when the colonel requested to make a phone call, why was he denied?" Captain Chun asked. Johnson stepped forward to answer. "Ma'am, in our experience, suspects who insist on making phone calls during traffic stops are often trying to contact associates who might interfere with our investigation. We thought he might be calling for backup." A slight smile crossed Captain Chun's face as she realized the irony of the situation. "Officers, you were correct about him calling for backup. You just didn't realize it would be military backup." The tension in the air began to ease slightly as both sides started to understand each other's perspectives. The police officers had followed their training when faced with suspicious behavior and an unknown computer flag. The military had followed their protocols when their commanding officer failed to check in on schedule. "Captain Chun, I'm ordering you to stand down your unit," Richardson said officially. "There is no threat to military personnel at this location." Captain Chun nodded and spoke into her radio. "All units, stand down to condition green. Repeat, stand down to condition green. Secure weapons and return to transport vehicles." The change in the soldiers was immediate and dramatic. Weapons were lowered and secured. The defensive positions were abandoned as soldiers began moving back toward their armored vehicles. The neighborhood, which had felt like a war zone moments before, suddenly became peaceful again. Martinez watched in amazement as the military personnel transformed from a combat-ready unit back into professional soldiers conducting routine operations. The speed and precision of both their deployment and their stand-down showed a level of training and discipline he had never seen before. "Officers," Captain Chun said, approaching Martinez and Johnson, "I want to thank you for your professionalism. During this incident, you maintained calm behavior even when faced with an overwhelming military response." Martinez wasn't sure he had been particularly professional, but he appreciated Captain Chun's diplomatic approach to the situation. "Thank you, Captain. We're sorry this got so complicated." Colonel Richardson walked over to where Martinez and Johnson were standing. "Officers, I owe you an apology as well. I should have identified myself as military personnel from the beginning. My insistence on making a phone call without explaining why must have seemed very suspicious." "Colonel, you were just following your protocol, same as us," Martinez replied. "We all learned something today about how our different jobs can create misunderstandings." By now, the soldiers had loaded back into their armored vehicles. The entire deployment and withdrawal had taken less than 15 minutes, but Martinez knew he would remember it for the rest of his career. He had never seen anything like the precision and efficiency of the military response. Captain Chun approached Colonel Richardson one final time. "Colonel, with your permission, I'd like to coordinate with local law enforcement to prevent this type of incident in the future." Richardson nodded approvingly. "Excellent idea, Captain. Perhaps we can arrange some cross-training between our units and the civilian police departments in this area." Martinez found himself interested in that possibility. Understanding how military protocols worked might help police officers handle similar situations better in the future. It would also help the military understand how civilian law enforcement operates during routine traffic stops. The armored vehicles started their engines and began moving out in the same formation they had arrived in. Neighbors who had gathered to watch the unusual scene started returning to their houses, though Martinez knew this story would be told in the neighborhood for years to come. "Colonel." Richardson reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He handed Martinez a business card with his name and contact information. "Officer Martinez, if your department ever wants to arrange that cross-training Captain Chun mentioned, please don't hesitate to contact me." Martinez took the card and shook Richardson's hand. "Thank you, Colonel. And for what it's worth, you can make that phone call anytime you need to?" Richardson smiled as he walked back to his motorcycle. "I think I'll remember to identify myself as military next time I get pulled over for speeding." As Richardson rode away and the last military vehicle disappeared down the street, Martinez and Johnson stood beside their patrol car trying to process what had just happened. A simple speeding ticket had turned into a military operation and back into a peaceful neighborhood in less than an hour. Johnson was the first to speak. "I guess we're going to have an interesting report to write." Martinez laughed, feeling the tension finally leave his body completely. "I don't think anyone's going to believe this story."